Hey everybody, Ron Harris here. Welcome to my channel, Ron Harris Muscle. Some of you may know that bodybuilding was on television for many years. In fact, it was on ESPN, the sports network, for quite a while. I know this because I was the associate producer of a show called American Muscle magazine on ESPN. I worked on it from 91 to 98, but at the time I worked on it in the 90s, it was the longest running show on ESPN after Sports Center, the highlight show that's still huge ratings all the time. One of the great aspects of the show, aside that it was magazine format and showed things from contest coverage, workouts, profiles, cooking, fashion, gossip, was that it showcased a lot of up-and-coming talent. In fact, my boss, Lou Zwick, probably had the best eye for future talent and potential that I've ever seen in bodybuilding. He was a scout, an amazing talent scout, as it were. So I want to show you a segment that aired almost 30 years ago. And this is actually the first time I've seen this segment. I wrote it and picked out the footage for it 3 decades ago, and I haven't seen it since then. It was reloaded, uploaded to YouTube, transferred from VHS. Quality isn't the best, but it's still a very entertaining segment that I want you guys to be able to check out. Those of you who are real bodybuilding historians are going to get a real kick out of this. So let's go to it. And I'm going to make it full screen.
When you see competitive bodybuilding's elite men and women here or in the magazines, it's hard to imagine that they were ever struggling amateurs with dreams of having the best bodies in America. Rich Gaspari was 18 years old when he decided to skip the team nationals and enter the 1982 American Cup. That's when we first spotted him. There, he beat the Goliath Vic Richards and turned pro just 2 years later at the nationals. Throughout the 1980s, he became one of the best in the sport, pestered only by the invincible Lee Haney.
Yeah, so Rich Gaspari. So that Rich wasn't on the show because I don't think the show started until 86 or 87, but Lou Zwick, the producer, the executive producer of the show, my boss for those years, he was also a contest promoter, and I think the first major competition he put on was called the American Cup. I think he was able to get ESPN to air it. He got a TV deal for it, got sponsors, all that good stuff, and Rich was the teenage winner. And I remember looking at the pictures because he had files on all these bodybuilders. He had hundreds and hundreds, thousands of files of individual bodybuilders. And Rich Gaspari had that same vascularity and muscle density, the striations and everything, even as a teenager, which goes to show you that what we call muscle maturity, sometimes guys get it very quickly. So let's move on to the next future superstar that Lou discovered.
We started covering Paul DeMayo in 1987. When he was a teenager who'd started training just a year before at the famous Gold's Gym in Everett, Massachusetts. Paul entered and won his first show, the Teenage Massachusetts, at 218 pounds. Now known as Quadzilla for his outrageous thigh development, he's one of the nation's most successful amateurs and soon destined to turn pro.
Thing about Paul was from my area, Boston. I knew him a little bit. That shoot that you just saw with the Muscle Mania tank top, I don't think he had a car at the time. He moved out from Boston to Venice, and I drove out to Venice, picked him up, took him to the gym in Pasadena for that workout. It was my gym. I always loved to bring people to do the filming at my gym, of course, if I could, and then brought him back. He only competed as a pro twice. I think it was the 96 Olympia, and he got like last place, didn't do well. He didn't really have time to prepare for it. He did one of the Grand Prix shows, never competed as a pro again, and unfortunately, he died a few years later of a heroin overdose. So much talent, so much potential, but like a lot of athletes in sports, but especially bodybuilding that I've known, you know, got caught up in other things, life, addictions, things like that. I really believe Paul could have and should have been one of the very top pros in the sport had he continued on and had the right guidance and the right mindset. He would have been really great.
Milos Sarcev left his Yugoslavian homeland to pursue his dream of being a bodybuilder. He drew our attention at the AAU Universe. Milos then switched to NPC national level competition. This year, he established himself firmly as one of the most formidable pros on the circuit and earned yet another invitation to the Mr. Olympia.
Okay, so that just showed you. I didn't even watch the segment. I told you I was watching it for the first time. So this segment we produced 1993. This was 31 years ago. Milos ended up getting much larger than what you just saw there. He would go on to place very highly in dozens of shows. I think he did about 80 shows or 85 shows altogether. And yeah, now he's legendary as a coach. coaches until recently, Samson Dauda, among many others. Yeah, I mean, well, but he was at that time, he was just an up and coming, pretty new pro. He had only been on the scene about a year and a half and was just starting out. But Lou saw the potential in Milos very early on.
It was a long-distance telephone call that informed us about Gary Strydom. He'd already won the Mr. South Africa title twice before arriving in Florida in 1983. He soon won the Junior Florida, the Texas State, and the overall NPC Nationals title in 1986. Gary garnered titles such as the Knight of the Champions in the IFBB before becoming the WBF's reigning champion for 2 years.
Yeah, so Gary's career, I mean, his physique, I believe, peaked in those 2 years when he was with the WBF, the World Bodybuilding Federation, which was wrestling promoter and entrepreneur Vince McMahon's foray into bodybuilding. He tried to make bodybuilding into like a sports entertainment sort of thing, the way he had done with wrestling. And he thought by doing so, by making it more entertaining, giving the guys characters, huge production values, pay-per-views, he thought that was going to elevate it into mainstream popularity, which it didn't really translate, because you can't make people interested in bodybuilding if they're not interested. As glitzy and glamorous as you want to package it, it's still at its core, it's guys up there flexing. And most people have no idea what they're looking at when they're looking at different physiques. The guys all look the same to them. Bunch of big roided out juice heads. They have no appreciation for it. They're not interested. But Gary never really realized his potential in the IFBB, because I think those years that he was with WBF, which is only a couple of years, and he went over for the money. Vince McMahon offered him, I believe it was $1 million a year. He was the highest paid athlete they had, which Joe Weider was not willing to match that. And when he came back, he came back one more time many years later, and it was not quite the same. I mean, he was in his 40s by then, I believe. So now we go to female bodybuilding.
While we were covering the 1989 Canadian Championships, Sharon Bruneau walked on stage and instantly mesmerized the crowd with her exotic looks and sultry posing style. The attractive Bruneau is now not only a top finisher in the Ms. Olympia contest, but is successfully pursuing her interests in acting and modeling.
Sharon still looks great. The thing I want to say about what we just saw is that the size of a top Ms. Olympia competitor, and that was 1992, which had been the most recent edition of the show at that time, it's now comparable to what we see in women's figure. Women's physique athletes are bigger than that, but even a lot of the top figure competitors are bigger than what Sharon was there, and she was a consistent top 5 Olympia, Ms. International placer. So women's bodybuilding certainly evolved. I think it was probably the 4 to 6 years following this that the women got much, much bigger, to the point where they canceled the Ms. Olympia. At one point, there was not going to be a Ms. Olympia one year. It was rescued at the last minute by Bob Bonham and Kenny Castle, and I think they found a high school in New Jersey to put on at the last minute. Otherwise, there would have been no Ms. Olympia that year. Now, of course, it's part of the Olympia weekend. Back in those days, it was a standalone event. It had to sustain itself. Now, it's just part of a larger weekend. The Olympia weekend encompasses all the divisions, so it's in no danger, especially now with Jake Wood in charge. There's no danger of women's bodybuilding ever being canceled or going away ever again.
Dennis Newman made his debut in 1989 at age 19 with sweeping teenage victories at the San Jose, Orange County, and the Team USA, despite a lack of huge muscle size and maturity. With prodding and direction, he was, within a year, one of the sport's premier figures, sought by supplement companies and equipment manufacturers throughout the country. Today, Dennis is recognized as one of bodybuilding's sleeping giants, thanks to his good looks and superb shape.
So Dennis, you may know, he was still an amateur when we did this segment in early 93. He did the USA that year, I believe. No, he did the Nationals. He took second to Mike Francois. 94, he won the USA. And shortly after that, he came down or was diagnosed with leukemia, was knocked out. He was lucky to be alive, really. He kicked it. He beat leukemia. He came back and guest posed, against the wishes. He did like a rebel guest posing that we had actually arranged at the Olympia in, I think it was 97, 96, 97. I can't recall the year exactly, where he just sort of ran through the audience and jumped up on stage while the guys were doing their pose down. But anyway, Dennis, I think, could have been, if not Mr. Olympia, certainly a very top Olympian, top Arnold Classic guy. He had crazy genetics, just beautiful shape, structure, symmetry, proportions, that classic look, but with a lot more muscle. He was about 5'11" or 6 foot, about 250 to 260 on stage, huge shoulders, tiny little waist, flaring thighs, big arms. I mean, it was a hell of a physique. Moving on.
Ken Flex Wheeler came up from humble beginnings in Fresno, California, a lanky martial arts champion who was pushed into bodybuilding. We took notice of Flex's potential when he was just 18. After becoming Mr. California and winning the USA a few years later, Flex has become the hottest thing in the sport. His comic book size and shape drove him to an undefeated 4-for-4 record in his first year as a pro. And now he seems a surefire bet to win this year's Mr. Olympia contest. We're proud to have been the first to spot his remarkable potential.
So you may know that Flex took second place that year at the Olympia to Dorian Yates. It was Dorian's second Olympia win. It wasn't really close. That was probably, the first couple years Dorian won the Olympia, the first 2 or 3 years were probably the best he ever looked. He had no injuries at that point, hadn't torn his bicep yet. But Flex was a phenomenon. And I give a lot of credit to Lou, because Lou spotted his potential when Flex, if I had seen pictures of him or video or even in person, I would not for a minute have thought this kid, and he was a kid at the time, was going to be a bodybuilding superstar. I just, to me, he looked narrow. He wasn't very big. I didn't see it, but Lou could see the structure, the muscle bellies. He could see things like that. He could see long-term potential. Whereas I was like, I could only really tell once the people were pretty close to the way they were going to look eventually. That's when I could say, wow, this guy's great. Oh,
redefine web hosting with Bluehost Cloud, the new platform made in partnership with the.
That's the end. Okay. Well, that's it, guys. It's a short one today, but I just thought it was interesting to show you a few of the superstars that my boss at the time used to put on the show American Muscle, and there would be many more guys like Dorian Yates, Kevin Levrone, Mike Matarazzo, Sean was another one. That segment we did there, even though it was 93, I could have had another like 4, 5, 6 guys on there easy. Actually, probably could have been 10 to 20, but we wanted to keep it a short segment. I think it was sort of a last minute thing we put together because we needed to fill a time slot. It was a magazine format show. It was 1 hour. We needed exactly like 44 minutes and 22 seconds of content, something like that. That was very specific. So we needed to make something that was going to be like 3 minutes and 14 seconds to fill that gap. And at the last minute, it was something that we already had the footage for. I would just write a script. We had our guy Andy do the voiceover, and that was it. So I hope you enjoyed it. That was one of a couple things. I think I'm going to find more of those and show you those in the future. I'm going to look around and see what else is there. I hope the quality is a little better, because that was obviously a very, very shaky, very, very poor transfer from the VHS quality-wise. But I still hope you enjoyed it. Please, if you like the channel, and you like what you see, subscribe, like, and share. Helps me out. Doesn't cost you anything as I'm trying to grow this channel. Thanks a lot for watching the Ron Harris Muscle channel. I'll see you next time.